Schools in the UK are facing a significant teacher retention crisis. A staggering 44,000 teachers left their positions last year, marking the highest quit rate since 2017. 5 weeks, 4,200 teachers gone, more than 1,800 staff-directed incidents. Violence in England's secondary schools up over 60%. That is the state of British education tonight. And it's why the country is now facing one of the most urgent walkouts in modern school history. Across dozens of campuses, teachers describe the same pattern: classrooms slipping out of their control, behavior erupting with no warning, and clusters of recently arrived migrant teens forming tight, aggressive microgroups that dominate corridors and intimidate staff. Several teachers say these groups coordinate online, organize confrontations, and treat disruption like a daily sport, while leadership quietly looks the other way. But the violence is not the only crisis. The louder alarm, the one breaking staff morale, is the silence from above. Multiple senior teachers say they've been strongly advised not to frame behavioral issues in ways that create negative perceptions of migrant background students. Off the record, they call it what it feels like: a gag order. We're told to keep classrooms calm with no power, no backup, and no honesty. One departing teacher said, "Schools aren't learning environments anymore. They're containment centers." And that is why tonight's story matters. Not because 4,200 teachers resigned, but because so many of them say the same sentence: "We don't feel safe, and we're not allowed to say why." So before we move into the full investigation, I want your take. Are teachers telling the uncomfortable truth, or are the unions exaggerating to force political pressure? Drop your view in the comments. Your perspective helps us shape the next segment. No one in the UK expected the number to be this high. Not parents, not councils, not even the unions. But 4,200 teachers walking out in just 5 weeks wasn't a labor dispute. It was a warning. The loudest, clearest alarm the British education system has sounded in decades. And what they're describing inside secondary schools is not misbehavior. It's collapse. Teachers say violence didn't spike. It detonated. Classrooms where 13-year-olds square up to staff like adults. Lunch halls turning into turf zones claimed by tight-knit migrant groups newly placed into mainstream classes. Corridors where pupils are shoved, cornered, and threatened in languages staff don't understand. Lessons interrupted not by chatter, but by organized intimidation that feels less like teenagers acting out, and more like microgangs testing who really runs the school. This isn't media exaggeration. This is what teachers themselves are reporting, the ones who just quit because they couldn't take another day. A science teacher in Manchester said she hasn't taught a full lesson without a confrontation in months. A history teacher in Cudden described packs of boys who dominate corridors, daring staff to intervene. One senior leader in Birmingham told us plainly, "We're not teaching anymore. We're containing violence. Parents are only hearing scraps of what's happening. The polished lines from school leadership, the vague references to behavior challenges, the careful emails that never mention the word everyone in the staff room is whispering." This is linked to recent migrant placements. Off record, teachers say the truth is unavoidable. Many of the new arrivals placed directly into Year 9 and Year 10 come with little English, no integration support, and backgrounds shaped by conflict and instability. When placed into already stretched schools, they form defensive, insular groups. Groups older pupils gravitate toward, groups younger pupils fear, and groups teachers have no tools or authority to control. And when violence breaks out, teachers say leadership now reacts faster to avoiding controversy than to protecting staff. One teacher in Leeds reported a violent incident that left a pupil hospitalized. The first instruction she received from senior management: do not refer to the background of the students involved. Keep the report neutral. Neutral, even when the parents of the injured boy demanded answers. Another teacher in South London said she was explicitly warned not to use the phrase "new arrivals" in any written documentation, even when the same group of new arrivals had been involved in 3 altercations in 1 week. And slowly, the fear shifted from what's happening to this school to what happens when the system refuses to admit what's happening. Parents sense it too. The worried glances at pickup time, the rumors spreading through WhatsApp groups, the sudden decision by some families to move their children just to be safe. because mothers and fathers across Britain are now asking questions no parent should ever have to ask. Is my child safe at school? Are teachers still in control? Why isn't anyone telling us the full story? Teachers walking out didn't cause this crisis. They exposed it. And what they're exposing is brutal. Schools that once felt like structured learning environments now feel like unpredictable battlegrounds. And the people responsible for protecting children say they no longer can. Not with current policies, not with current restrictions, not with the pressure to stay silent. Tonight, the message from the 4,200 who left isn't subtle. It isn't polite. It isn't political. It is a plea and a warning. If we can't keep control of the classroom, your children are not safe. Inside England's secondary schools, the situation unfolding is far more serious than anything parents have been told. Teachers say the crisis isn't hidden. It's simply ignored. And behind the closed doors of staff rooms and safeguarding offices, the truth is far darker than the polished statements sent to families. The school day no longer starts with lesson plans. It starts with warnings quietly traded between teachers. Which corridor turned volatile this morning? Which group has been circling the canteen looking for confrontation? Which new arrivals were added to the register with no background information at all? By the first break, entire departments are already drained, not from teaching, but from trying to stop chaos before it becomes unmanageable. Parents are reassured that behavior is being monitored. Teachers insist the reality is nothing of the sort. A Birmingham teacher described stepping into a corridor where several boys, all new to the school that week, had surrounded a younger pupil. She intervened only to be told later to write the report in neutral terms so it wouldn't lead to misunderstandings. She said the message was unmistakable. Tell the truth, but not too clearly. In Liverpool, a staff member explained how her school now restricts who can review CCTV of violent incidents. Only select senior leaders are allowed to see the full footage. Teachers involved in the incident receive a heavily softened verbal summary. She called it a blackout by design, created to protect the school's image rather than the staff inside it. Across multiple regions, this same pattern repeats. Reports edited before being logged, context removed, descriptions rewritten in vague language. One safeguarding officer shared that she had been instructed to minimize detail when speaking to parents about an altercation that left a pupil bruised. She said, "The silence is not accidental. It is policy." A Leeds teacher recounted receiving 2 boys midweek with 0 briefing and barely any English. Within an hour, the entire class dynamic shifted. Louder, sharper, more hostile. When she asked for support, she was told to prioritize inclusion and avoid drawing unhelpful conclusions. She said it felt like being handed responsibility for a situation no one would acknowledge. The pressure is emotional, but it is physical too. Teachers describe classrooms where one spark can turn 15 seconds into a fight, requiring multiple adults to intervene. Chairs thrown, doors forced open, fire alarms pulled, staff backed into corners, phones shoved into their faces. And through it all, leadership repeats the same message. Remain calm, avoid escalation, and above all, do not connect any of this to the wider migration issue. One history teacher with nearly 30 years of experience said he decided to resign the moment he was told to consider the political climate before filing a report about a threat made against him. It was the first time he said that safeguarding guidelines felt like political instructions. Parents believe schools are a place of safety. Teachers now quietly admit they're no longer certain they can guarantee that. A mother in Manchester said her daughter refuses to eat in the cafeteria because it feels like trouble is waiting to happen. Another parent in London said her son stopped attending after-school clubs because the groups roaming the halls don't care about rules. The exodus of 4,200 teachers wasn't triggered by workload. It wasn't triggered by pay. It was triggered by fear. Fear for themselves, fear for their students, and fear of a government that seems more committed to preserving a narrative than confronting the danger inside British schools. What's happening inside Britain's secondary schools is not a mystery in Westminster. It's an inconvenience. And that distinction is exactly why the crisis has spiraled. For months, Downing Street has received direct warnings from education advisors, safeguarding leads, and regional behavior specialists. Not vague predictions. Explicit reports describing rising aggression tied to rapid intake schemes, resettlement placements, and newly arrived pupils being moved into mainstream classrooms with no support structure. One internal memo described the situation as accelerating beyond the capacity of staff to stabilize. Yet the government's official line remains stubbornly identical. No national safety issue, no behavioral link to migration, no cause for public concern. Teachers say those statements feel less like reassurance and more like gaslighting. Inside the Department for Education, the priority is not fixing the problem, it's controlling the optics. Officials fear that acknowledging the scale of classroom violence could inflame debates around migration policy or undermine Starmer's narrative about restoring order. And so they've chosen silence over support. Teachers across multiple regions report the same pattern. Leadership instructed to avoid language that may stigmatize. Safeguarding teams told to use discretion when recording motive. Local authorities quietly urging schools to protect community confidence. One head teacher in London said she was pressured to remove a line from a safeguarding report because it risked generating tensions. The line simply described a recently arrived group of boys surrounding a teacher and threatening her after school. The issue wasn't the threat, it was the politics. Parents, meanwhile, receive a sanitized version of events. Teachers trying to keep children safe are told to maintain calm, but are given no tools, no reinforcements, and no authority to enforce consequences. And each time violence escalates, government spokespeople repeat the same line. Schools face challenges every generation. A senior minister privately dismissed the resignations as union exaggeration. That comment traveled quickly through staff rooms and landed like a slap. Because here's what teachers hear in statements like that. Your safety is negotiable. Your experience is inconvenient. Your fear is politically problematic. Starmer's promise to restore trust in institutions collapses the moment the institution in crisis is told to soften its language instead of strengthening its protection. A leaked briefing last week suggested the government is considering new guidelines instructing schools to highlight positive integration outcomes and avoid patterns of attribution that create fear. In plain English, manage the narrative, not the danger. Meanwhile, teachers continue to report threats, intimidation, and classroom eruptions they say they've never witnessed in their careers. Parents wait for clarity. Teachers wait for help. The government waits for the news cycle to move on. And that vacuum, that refusal to speak honestly, is what terrifies schools more than the behavior itself. As one deputy head in Manchester put it, we're not asking for miracles. We're asking the government to admit what's happening before someone gets seriously hurt. Today, the crisis isn't in the hands of those who understand it. It's in the hands of those who refuse to acknowledge it. Britain is truly facing a school system losing teachers, classrooms becoming uncontrollable, and a government losing the courage to speak the truth. Parents are not imagining the danger. Teachers are not exaggerating their fears. The cracks are real, and they are widening. Now, the question is, do you think ministers are concealing the truth to protect stability or to protect themselves? Let us know in the comments. Your voice will shape the next course of this inquiry.